MP for Elgin Middlesex London from 2004 to 2015, currently serving as Mayor of the City of St. Thomas and also a local business owner. To Joe's left, we have Rona Morgan, a four-time Green Party candidate, both provincially and federally, and she is currently the Executive Director of the Bereaved Families of Ontario for the Southwest region. And rounding out our panel is Cameron Anderson, an Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Western Ontario. Cameron teaches researching elections, voting, and public opinion in Canada. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
Good evening. Good evening.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, I want you to take a look into your crystal balls, if you would, and just run down the row and tell me, what is your thoughts on the outcome for this evening nationally? What are we expecting to see? Joe?
Well, first of all, I should tell you that after 35 years in politics, I used to be 6'4" like you, and this is what happens to you after 35 years. But listen, this has been a sort of a strange election. There hasn't been any coattails, I think, for either the Liberals or the Conservatives. It may very well be the first time that the two major parties are essentially going to get less than 34% of the vote. I think it's obviously going to be a minority government. I think it's going to be a Liberal minority government. And I think somewhere between 140 and 145 seats is where I think it's going to be for the Liberals.
Great.
Well, I actually find myself in the position of agreeing with you, Joe. My prediction is a Liberal minority. And I think, too, we're probably looking at about 140 or so seats. And what I'm really looking for tonight in particular is where the Green vote shows up. And whether or not they gain some momentum in this election, with the climate change issue being one that's really on the top of Canadians' minds.
Mm-hmm. Joe?
Yeah, I think we're right on the seat counts. It's something around 140. I think it's a Conservative minority. I think for sure this has been a 40-day practice for another election sometime a year or a year and a half from now. Yep. Canadian minority governments tend to last about 18 months, and I think that this has been a really good practice for the next one.
Yep.
I would say, regardless of the outcome tonight, it's going to be a victory for Greens across the country because climate change has become kind of the defining issue in this election. And so for somebody who is not used to being an elected candidate, that is how I would define success. And in terms of the vote count, I think I'm probably more in agreement with Sean and Joe. Fontana, first Joe. Joe number one.
It's a real Joe job right here now.
Joe F.
Just so you're in agreement with Joe, it'll work anytime.
Yes.
That's true.
Down with the Joes.
To a professional political scientist. Cameron, what are your thoughts?
Sure, yeah. Well, so I think that I would agree that it's going to be a minority result. I do think that based upon the best information I've seen up until today, that it's probably likely to be a Liberal minority. I'd probably be a little less optimistic than Joe F. and Sean regarding the seat count, probably a little below 140, 130, 135 seats for the Liberals. And I think one thing that I would add from the political science hat is I think the turnout will be lower this election than in the 2015 election, where it was a sort of a high point for the sort of post-1990s election, federal election turnout. And I think this one will be down a little bit from the most recent election.
That's an awesome segue to my first question to get us going. Why is voter apathy so strong in this country?
Well, I'm not sure.
Why don't people want to vote anymore?
Well, no. Well, that's in 2015. I think we had a record turnout. I think, this campaign has been mostly negative. I don't think there's been enough discussion about the various platforms. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at where people are and what they want and where they stand, 65% of the people are on the left side of the equation. And only 30 to 32% are on where the Conservatives are. So I think the people have already spoken. I don't think it's apathy. I think that there's frustration. That debate, that English debate, was just an absolute abysmal failure. You couldn't even hear what anybody's talking about. So I don't know. Typically, municipally, provincially, federally, you're going to get 70-75% of the vote. It's unfortunate in a way. Need to get more and more people engaged, but for all intents and purposes, unless you made, like Australia made, it was compulsory for you to vote, which might not be a bad idea for us to think about in the future.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that it's so much voter apathy as it's just there's not an appetite, there's no particular wedge issue that's driving a need for real change. Okay. This government is only at the end of its first 4-year term. The voter fatigue has not set in yet. Governments tend to defeat themselves over time as they get into second, third, sometimes fourth terms. I think Joe might have had one of those fourth terms. Joe Fontana, that is.
Yes.
You tend
Joe
to see
did rather well,
a desire for change, but it takes a while for that desire for change to coalesce. And this campaign has been, as Mr. Fontana was saying, very focused on sort of the personal attacks, not a whole lot of platform discussion. That seemed to come really at the very last moment for a lot of folks making their decisions last minute on the issues. I think people are just kind of turned off when it's all
negative.
Just personal attack. He's a phony, he's not a real Canadian, whatever the attack happens to be. People just tune that stuff out.
Yeah, I have to agree. It was an election of cliches and an election of personal attack. And, you know, we call it apathy. I think many Canadians believe they're going to be well governed regardless of what happens. They're going to be at least reasonably well governed regardless of what happens. So they're looking for something more special than, you know, he's not a broker, or he wore a Halloween costume. Look, folks, let's talk platform, let's talk real issues, let's get down to 2 or 3 things and say what you're going to do different than the other person rather than what he did bad. Right. And look, it's Joe, I know it's how you did politics, and Sean and yourself, and I've been there with Brona. That's exactly what it is. It's look, I'm okay. You can say anything you want about me if it's something I've done, right? But let's mostly talk about what both of us together could do different and make the country better. So.
Well, and I think it's one thing to say, you know, this is what you did in office that I disagree with.
Right.
It's another thing to say this is what you did 25 years ago before you ever ran for office.
There's no record of that, Sean. No.
Hey, I am with you. I am thankful that there was not social media when I was in high school. I fully admit that. I'm glad that that's the case.
I'd like to apologize now.
For what I did on Halloween.
You know, the thing that I think is, I guess my comment on this is like from somebody who has been through 4 elections. I have never been in the presence of people that I thought got into politics because they're evil people.
Right.
And
never
so I've never felt motivated to just like talk in a nasty way to any of the people. I might not disagree with all of their ideas about the way the country should be run, but everybody gets into this kind of field because they honest to God believe, or honest to creator or fate believe, that they have the best ideas and they're gonna make Canada or their community a better place. And so if we honestly, in the media and in all of our interactions with each other, could just focus on, here is my plan. I want this country, I want this community to be better. And just let your viewpoint on how to do that stand on its own, and leave the rest of the people, you know, like the rest of the people's personalities and stuff aside. I think that's what's going to make people.
But Joe will tell you, it used to be like that in Parliament. Not an election.
And I think still is.
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, it's become so polarized, it's become so personal that we used to be able to go out and after a great debate, discuss or disagree. Yeah. But at the end of the day, Joe and I could go out and have a drink, or we
give
could
them
go and have
feedback of how we could have said it better.
No,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
But we all
changed?
wanted
like,
this.
What was that thing
that
changed?
Tribalism, though, that tribalism
Yeah.
that we have in partisan politics today is really, I think,
An
part
American
of the problem.
style.
And it does drive the voter turnout down because people don't want that tribalism. They want to talk about ideas.
Yes,
and the truth of it is,
and it's compromise.
So
you know, all 4 of
us talking about ideas.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand either. Like, if
What's
it was like
fear?
that, when did it change?
Is there a fear on their side that they don't want to share the platform, or what?
We went from a 30-second soundbite where there might be some real facts, figures, and plan in it to a 5-second soundbite, and it has to be "you're wrong," rather than I'm going to do such and such. You know, it really is the social media piece, even the clip on the news, even the clip from question period now is only 5 seconds long. It isn't the 30 seconds. Where some idea was actually made before somebody beat somebody with a hammer, right? About their past behavior.
well, and those clips take away the context.
Sure.
So you're not getting the idea expressed in its full context. You're just getting that negativity, and it's not helpful. I mean, you've got people here who have been involved with all four major parties across the country, and I think we'd all agree, no party has a perfect platform. Nobody's got a monopoly on good ideas, and frankly, nobody's got a monopoly on bad ideas either. But there becomes this, I've got to say Joe's idea is wrong because he's on the blue team. When I may actually like the idea, but that tribalism, that partisan politics has really developed in the last, I'd say especially in the last decade, as we've gotten into the Twitter and Instagram politics, has really turned the tide.
I think it takes strong leadership too. I mean, I'm going to recognize Jack Layton. I spent time in Parliament with Jack and spent time in the gym with Jack. Jack would work out.
Jack would work out at like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Obviously, it worked for him.
Yeah, well, he would work out, and I'd sit and talk politics with him. But we went into it under the premise that we didn't believe in each other's philosophies from time to time. But we both went there with altruistic reasons to make our country better. And I gave him the benefit of the doubt that I could listen to what he had to say about downtown Toronto, and he could listen what I had to say about rural Southern Ontario.
Well, let me give you an example. When in fact we had a minority government. And the NDP essentially could save us from that election. It was I and Jack Layton who, as a municipal councillor, he was a great proponent of housing. I told him, I said, Jack, ask for $1.5 billion. That's going to help me as the Minister of Housing, and we got it done, right? So sometimes you got to do that, because I think if you look at all the platforms, save and accept who's going to get rid of the deficit a little quicker. Everybody's about family. Everybody's about jobs. Everybody is about the environment. You know, if you look at every platform of every party, it's there. It's all there. It differs on how much, when, how, and where.
Well, and it might be a really good time for Canada to have a minority parliament, frankly, and get some of that cooperation back. And Joe, you mentioned that minority parliament that you were in, where the NDP, the Martin government, worked with the NDP to get a budget deal through. Hey, as a municipal councillor, I'm still incredibly grateful for the fact that that minority parliament brought in the gas tax transfer, and we are still benefiting. This city today is benefiting to the tune of $21 million in federal funding because a minority parliament, two different parties came together and made that commitment.
But if the tribalism is that strong between the parties, can they work together in a minority government? Do you think there's the will there, or the leadership will to make that happen?
I think the people are going to demand after this election, regardless of the outcome, even though I've heard Mr. Scheer say that he's not going to work with anyone, and you had Jagmeet say he's not working with the Conservatives. I'm not necessarily sure that that's the right answer for both of them.
Well, you still got your uniform on the field, the adrenaline's running.
Oh, no, of course.
Let's now wait till tomorrow morning or the day after and look at what the reality brings us. And hopefully we will see a little more common sense.
Yep.
You know, I don't have to be right. And you have to have leaders now that will also do that. But part of what we've got now is we also have a number of parties who we're treating it considerably too much American. It is about the 4 leaders or 5 leaders. We don't vote for the Prime Minister in this country. We just don't. If I don't live in Saskatchewan or Papineau or BC, wherever the leader lives, I don't get to vote for them. I had this discussion with a group of high school kids just yesterday, as a matter of fact, about, well, Scheer said this and Jagmeet Singh said this, and I went, yeah, well, that's really good, but when you get into the ballot box tomorrow, it's going to say 5 names or 6 names on there, and they're going to be the Liberal candidate and the Green candidate from this riding, and you're going to have to pick from one of those. Well, what about I don't like? Okay, and I know what you don't like, but parliamentary democracies are based around picking the smartest, best person in your riding, sending a bunch of them to Ottawa, and their leader, the one who's the uniforms that most get there, get to be the Prime Minister. And I always said, look, if you know, I know it's okay if you don't like my Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Because you can only vote for me. You're not in Calgary West. You can't vote for Stephen Harper. However, send me there and I'll make him a better leader.
Yeah.
I had that same discussion with my nephew, who's in civics in grade 10 this semester, and of course they're spending a lot of time researching what's going on in the election campaign. And we had the discussion about when you go into the ballot box, it's not Singh, Trudeau, Scheer, May on your ballot. It's going to be Matheson and Hammoud and Call and Van Holst. Those are going to be the names on your ballot. And he had actually done his homework. He knew who the local candidates were, but he was looking at it from the lens of, well, you know, he did his homework. He really did. But when I asked him about some of the reasons, one of the reasons was, well, Jagmeet's got the best Instagram.
His TikTok stuff was
yeah,
exactly.
So that discussion, I think, is something that Canadians really need to get back to. If I lived in Elgin, Middlesex, listen, I'm a New Democrat. I would vote for Karen Vecchio because I think she's the best person for the job. She's way better than the last MP.
Yeah, well,
the guy she succeeded was.
At each election, we improved there. Yeah.
But if you think about it too, like from my experience, and I think you're going to agree with me. I think you guys are probably going to agree with me in terms of the not the municipal level, but the levels where we have party politics. I feel like there's hope because of the way our candidates interact with each other in this area. So I always feel hopeful when I'm actually involved in an election because I have never been in an election where the goal of the other candidates was to trash each other. Like I think that we in this area in particular run some of the most civil and respectful campaigns, and so maybe we can be that shining light of hope that maybe we can bring an end to tribalism.
But that goes back to what Joe was saying, is that it's become, traditionally it's been leader, party, platform, local MP, or local candidate.
Yep.
And that local candidate sometimes only matters between 5 and 10%, but you know that 5 or 10% could be the differential. And
well, watch tonight how many ridings that's the difference.
So, but now it's gotten to be, forget about the platform. It's all about parties and or leader. Very much like the American system, right? It's all about TV.
We live
it's
too
all
close.
about who said what, when, where, and how, right?
But when you get to know the actual people, like
That's the difference.
yeah, exactly. Like when you I've sat down with people from every party, like outside of the Green Party, and had conversations with these people and found middle ground on issues that, for example, like that I'm trying to move forward on with respect to care for the bereaved, for example. And every single person, regardless of party stripe, says that's a good idea. I think if I get into power, if there's some way I can move ahead on this issue, I want to work with you on this.
That's the beauty of municipal government, and I think in the future, the days of wearing a party shirt are gone. I think more and more people are looking to the individual in a particular riding, especially when you have everybody talking about exactly the same issue. And look at when the whip told you that you needed to vote this way. I even voted against my own government 5 or 6 times when it came to something that was very, very important to London North Centre at the time. But look at the party structure, tribalism, as you call it. When they say this is the way it should be, unfortunately, sometimes that's what you got to do.
Should the leaders be taken out of the process then?
Ooh.
Should the leaders be taken out of the national process?
If I could change one thing.
Should they not focus their time in their own riding? And let the parties themselves have a spokesperson who, I'm just hypothesizing here, roll the platform out rather than having a leader.
You were leading, the Green Party was leading 2 votes.
If I could change one thing, Dan, in the elections process, is I would take the party name off the candidate's name on the ballot.
Okay.
So it would just say Joe Fontana. It wouldn't say Joe Fontana Liberal. Or it would just say Sean Lewis. It wouldn't say Sean Lewis NDP. That would, I think, force voters to learn a little bit about their local candidate. I think that would be a good place to start.
I guess that's kind of a tough one for me because it's expensive to buy signs, and getting your name out there for, especially, and also if you don't like signs, then getting your name out there for people who don't have a big party machine behind them is difficult. So I don't necessarily think that the solution is to take it off the ballot. I've always liked the idea of being able to vote for your candidate as well as your leader.
Oh, electoral reform.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would prefer to see some kind of change to the.
Not sure I want Republic.
We
We
have some results now from Elgin, Middlesex, London coming up, and Lambton, Kent, Middlesex is now coming up as well.
Right. Good. So we're starting to get Ontario results here.
Yes. So
There's
Lambton,
my friend
Middlesex right
Anthony.
now.
Congratulations,
Conservatives
buddy.
are leading. And Elgin, Middlesex, Karen Vecchio, incumbent Conservatives, currently also leading by 10 votes.
I'd say that's a good one.
Good job, Erica.
Okay.
But
So-
back to what we're saying.
Do we take the leaders out of it?
You can't take the
I don't think I'm not sure you can.
I don't think so.
No, but the media doesn't care about anybody else. But the
No,
platform,
they've got to have someone to
They want to make sure
see who
every
fell
night
down
they-
this week. Right? Right? You know, it's let's be clear. The media wasn't hounding the member from Elgin, Middlesex, London about agriculture pricing. Right? It just wasn't glamorous, and so you know, it just wouldn't work. It'd be fantastic if it was possible. I don't mind take it off the ballot, so people actually have to do a little homework before they go in there and say, "What was the name of that person?" Right? Right? So I'm good with that, and as I said, some of the students I was talking to yesterday, that might help them have to do the homework, the type of homework I'm talking about.
Well, and to
Well, the
Brona's point,
students will do the homework, but I don't know if everybody, like sometimes, some people are tired of being students.
I actually liked Rick Mercer's quote the other day about letting 16-year-olds vote, and he said, you know,
It's in the
If you can drive a car,
they've got to do the
you can drive a
homework. We
car,
can actually
surely
make
they'll do it,
them
for
do the
God's sake.
homework.
Absolutely.
We can't make the adults do the homework, but they're just as, and he said, you know, they're just as qualified as half
Sure.
the MPs in the House of Commons to make a decision. So why not let them vote too?
Somebody brought up electoral reform, and everybody's talked about electoral reform. The only thing I can tell you, and I don't mind if you want to go to a ranked ballot, I don't mind if you need to have a runoff if nobody gets 50% of the vote, because the majority of candidates get elected with 35 to 40% of the vote, including.
Well, I was always over 50. You were too, but
no,
but it does happen.
But you know, I would. But do not think
You're awesome.
about proportional representation.
I have
because
trouble
there-
with it too, Joe.
Because there isn't a country in the world that wouldn't want to get rid of it if they have it. If you look at Israel, if you look at Italy, that has 45 parties.
I disagree.
You can
When you
never
look
get,
at,
you can never
South
get a
Africa.
majority at all. I mean,
No,
it's going
I
to be
disagree
chaos.
with you completely there. Those governments, and the data doesn't support it. They don't have any more elections than the other democracies, and than the British democracy, than our democracy here. This idea that we're going to have more unstable governments
Italy's
is just
only
not
been in existence
accurate.
as a country for about 60 or 70 years. You know how many elections they've had? 75, thereabouts, right? They can't have a government for more than a year and a half. Why? Because it's all proportional representation. As soon as you get 3%, you get a vote in Parliament.
I spent 7 years as the chair of Procedure and House Affairs oversight of elections Canada. Certainly saw a lot of proportional representation and electoral reform pieces. I'd love to have the debate. I'd love to have the true debate about it. I like Joe. I'm not a big fan of appointed MPs.
Right.
And so any proportional representation that requires somebody to be put in Parliament off a party list, I just don't see the improvement there from them going to the people and being elected.
I don't think that's not the only
Okay,
form
not
of
saying-
proportional
that's not the only
representation.
form.
Just saying.
There's
You can have
many,
ranked balloting. You can have a whole bunch of other things. As long as
Still
somebody
okay,
gets 50%.
as long as we have the debate. I'm
But
okay.
even to the point that
Let's bring our political scientist in.
Yeah.
Cameron, you're quiet in the corner.
Yeah,
What
I'm
are your
quiet in the
thoughts
corner.
on
I'm following the results, listening
what-
along
what-
to the
What's your
partisan
thought
hats.
here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so a couple things. I mean, to the point of polarization that sort of started off. I mean, I think that. A minority government. Joe, you mentioned we might be coming back to an election again in
Very
18
soon.
months or 2 years. I think that a minority government, and this is, we have recent experience of that in the last 10, 15, 20 years. The threat of another election and the cost and the effort for parties, I think, is a mobilizing factor to find compromise across party lines. So whether that becomes potentially a Liberal and NDP working minority, coalition might be a little strong, but I mean, I think there will be potentially, institutional incentives, financial incentives for parties as well to sort of work together across party lines, which it may not move all the way to the Conservatives, but it might. There may be certain issues where the Conservatives find agreement with the Liberals. And I think it would be in a parliamentary system like Canada, those kinds of scenarios where the hard, blunt edge of polarization that we see in the U.S. Is maybe softened and sort of rubbed off a little bit in Canada. So, so to that point, I think that a minority can work perfectly well and hopefully have less of some of the vitriol that we've seen over the last 4 years, and certainly in this campaign in terms of the lack of ideas, as has been mentioned, and a lot of the mudslinging. So hopefully there'll be some constructive policy-oriented discussions and compromise that comes forward.
But everybody had a platform. The problem is that We never heard about it
Yep.
on television. We never heard it anywhere.
Wasn't
The
questioned.
media wasn't really focused on platform, and yet when people said the number one issue and the number two issue was climate change, or the number one issue was healthcare, did you hear anybody talk about healthcare during this campaign? Affordability, absolutely. Tax cuts, maybe. But no, but the platforms all spoke to it, but nobody on the media talked about it, including the leaders. It was more about, I don't like your plan. Why don't you just talk about your plan? How good it is or how whatever, right? But it was more to slam the other person and the other platform than it is to talk and espouse about your own.
Where do you see how this trickles down locally? How do you see that changing local flavor of elections
How? What do you
with
mean?
what we're discussing in terms of changes? How, do you see
Well,
that
we
would
tried
make
the
any
rank ballot,
major change locally?
Well,
Tried to rank ballot in London.
London
Quite
tried
successfully.
municipally.
Yeah, but same results as first past the post, right? I mean, so sometimes it sounds good.
I don't think the trouble is local.
No.
I don't think so.
Not at all.
I've never run in Metro Toronto, so I really can't say if it's that much different. But in every election I was in, Joe, hopefully you'll say it's the same. I became friends with the 4 or 5 or 6 candidates
Exactly.
that I was
Yeah.
running
Yep.
against.
Yeah.
We found ways to work together after the election, whether on community projects or other things, because we got to know each other in that private kind of way at some debates and stuff. Look,
I used to drive Ivan Kachurik home after every debate.
yeah.
Right?
In that
And yet
first Harper
he'd
minority,
take me on
right?
every day,
Uh,
right?
we had Irene Matheson in London Fanshawe. We had you, of course, in Elgin
Elgin
Middlesex. We had Ed Holder in London West.
Right.
And we had a fellow in London North Centre, Glenn Pearson, representing the Liberals.
right.
And honestly, in that minority government for this city, that was one of the most productive governments we've had
Well,
in the time I've lived
I'll tell you
here.
how much stuff we got
All
done at
four of
airports.
those MPs
Right.
showed up for events together all the time. When I was $92 million in infrastructure funding came through to the city, all 4 of them stood together with the mayor and announced that.
Yep.
And that was a minority government, and
But
that's
I
the
bet-
kind of
sure.
consensus building that you can get in those
But I
situations.
bet you Joe will admit, at least my experience, and I used to be National Caucus Chair too, is that the people who came to Parliament through the municipalities, as councillors, as mayors, were far more effective and did a lot more work together.
Because they didn't wear team
that was
uniform
their
at their
thing.
municipality. I
Yeah.
didn't come that way. I came straight into federal
Yeah,
politics,
yeah.
but I noticed the same thing,
No,
Joe.
no,
Many
exactly.
of them that
They're
had been
grounded
councillors
like
and
crazy.
mayors
Yep.
really did have a cooperative nature to,
Yep.
or a compromising nature to get things done. But it is the people, right?
It's one of the things I love about being in municipal government,
Yes.
honestly, is that I can work with Jesse Helmer in the morning on one issue and Phil Squire
Yeah.
on a different issue in the afternoon. And it's not about who's right or who's wrong on an issue. It's about who's got a good
the
idea.
issue.
Yep.
And to bring it back to the individual voter, I think all of us will agree the most important thing to do as a candidate is connect with human beings.
Right.
Like the most successful campaign tactic, you can be great on social media, you can be TV pretty, you can be wonderful at debates.
Never
but
worked for
what
me, bro.
what wins elections is the people knocking on the doors, having the conversations with the people in the riding,
Yes.
knowing what they need, and this is something that there's no candidate that I've ever been as impressed with as Karen is. She takes the time to know everybody. She will meet with you. She will have a conversation with you, even if you diametrically oppose everything. Then she'll have a conversation with you about why you don't like what she's doing. Like that is the solution. It's connecting with people, and that kind of solves this whole voter apathy too. Right. It's being able to connect with the individual, with a handshake, with a knock on the door, and getting out there in the community and working with people, as opposed to thinking, like, just really doing the things on the municipal level and on the ground that are really impacting people's lives. Those are what's going to change this, I think.
Let me ask you this, from your perspective, what were the missed opportunities in this election period, this campaign period? What were the big topics from your perspective that the parties completely missed on, perhaps cheated the voters out of an opportunity to actually have the conversation about?
I think mental health
Okay.
and maybe the opioid crisis. Again, people were saying healthcare was their number one issue. and we've seen it in our own communities, right? Where more and more demands are put on the police or someone to be social workers. Mental health, and whether or not it's a pharmacare program or whether or not it's dental care or whatever the case may be, or people are worried about the cost of health. And thank God we've got a system that's a heck of a lot better than that. The Americans, I like to hear Bernie Sanders and everybody always refer to the Canadian system as being at least pretty good, right? But I never heard much about healthcare, and yet in our own community, mental health, opioid crisis, these are things that are national. And yet
Joey,
have an effect.
don't disagree that those were important issues that didn't get discussed. But what was missing in this campaign was just straight good old-fashioned politeness.
Oh, yeah.
And if people were being a little better listeners and a lot more polite, then people could have talked about healthcare and mental health and, and some of the other issues rather than, oh yeah, so does your mother. It just quit being. That's not a strategy, folks. Just in case you're watching, that's not a strategy for success. That's one-upmanship today, and it's not going to work, and it's not going to carry the day. So there was lots of issues that got missed, and I'm not sure the issues got missed because they were bad issues. No, they got missed because we're busy setting each other's hair on fire instead of talking about the issue.
But the media's got to be a little complicit.
I'm
sorry about that, but I've got to.
Let's talk about that. How complicit is the media?
Well, no, if the four top issues in the minds of people are, as I've said before, healthcare, the climate change, affordability, taxes, what does the media report every night? Well, Trudeau said this about Scheer said this about Trudeau. It was about brown-face, blackface. It was about U.S. citizen. Give me a break. I mean, why doesn't the media take the time? And you know, there are a few programs that in fact do spend a little bit of time talking to the constituents, talking about the issues, and getting even some academics to come in and sort of critique everybody's platform.
Well, I think there's a real issue here in the fact that our local media here in London, but elsewhere around the country, has really been hollowed out over the last decade or so. I remember in 2003, the first campaign I worked on, the London Free Press had a reporter assigned to cover the NDP campaigns in the city, the Conservative campaign, and the Liberal campaign. Everybody had their own separate reporter. There was a little local tidbit in every issue of the paper every day. And now you had one person covering all the campaigns in the entire region. And it's not just the print media, it's the same with broadcast media, it's the same whether it's radio or television. The presence of online campaigning has really hurt traditional media's ability to cover the campaign because there's just not the person power available to cover all the campaigns anymore.
But the national media across the country, I don't think has spent enough time on the substance of what people really care about. It's all about personality again. It's again
the gotcha. Whatever the gotcha du jour is.
Because the gotcha gets the click.
Yeah, well, exactly. So if the media is motivated, but because media, like any other company, has to pay their bills. So if that is the thing that is making people watch, then that is what is going to happen. So it's about us.
I guess if your ratings go up when you do it, you'll do it. I get that.
Yeah.
But no other product in this world is sold by saying other people are bad. Right?
And yet they'll say that negative advertising, U.S. and Canada works.
I still have some trouble believing it. I truly do.
I just feel like that
it's a great way to get your attention. Now you got to go into substance. I hope.
But I feel like we have to put it on ourselves to just refuse to behave that way. Like there is,
and I have.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
most of the members sitting here have. Well, even tonight, if we'd had a national debate, the English language debate had gone like this, people would have learned the personalities of the people that they're going to vote for. Even if they haven't learned substance, they'd have at least learned, well, he's a reasonably nice guy. I'll go out for a beer with Jimmy.
Well,
he sounds like a great guy, right?
The French debates, though, especially the second one, where in fact they gave somebody more than 30 seconds or 15 seconds to answer the question, worked out really well. At least they had substantive discussions. And again,
but it is about behavior.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can have all the time in the world and all the platform in the world, but if you're not behaving properly, you're not getting your message out, and you're not letting anybody else get your message out, right? I'm trying to follow one of the debates by tweet because I wasn't at home, and the first tweet was, Maxime is talking over top of everybody for the first minute. I went, well, great. That really told me a lot about who I wanted and what they stood for, right? You may be rude. I'm not going to vote for the rude guy, I guess, but. Look,
I think we need to recognize, though, that there's an appetite for that. There's a lot of people right now in our society that don't have a voice. And so they see somebody who is loud and out there, and regardless of what they say, that's my guy and that's my lady, because she is just out there and loud. So what we have to recognize is the underserved, the ignored people in society. If we actually want to make this stuff better, and to get back to your original question, women's issues, hello. Like, did we address anything important about violence against women in this campaign? I don't think so. We had a debate that we didn't even have the one female leader of a major political party in Canada that just didn't get invited. Like, how ridiculous is that? For every young woman, for every woman of any age in this country, she just got excluded. There was no good reason for that. And so it's just, we really have to pay attention to the quiet voices. I think
and
that's
this is
what's
after
missing.
4 years of a commission looking at how we're going to run debates.
Yeah.
Right? Boy, that
we had a
went
worse
well, didn't
debate
it?
than we had
Come on,
prior.
folks. How about asking some of us? How about asking some of the public? How about just listening to the critique? Go on Facebook or Twitter after a debate and listen to that critique and design the format around the critique. It might at least solve some of the issue. Look, I think there's a whole lot of I know better than you in our current national media. Right? This is the issue, whether you say it is or not. I think it is, so I'm going to talk about abortion or blackface or whatever it might be. Right? How about how that leader can rally 100 other members of parliament to do something constructive and altruistic for our country? Do you have leadership abilities? Well, tell me about your leadership abilities. Right? I'm busy doing some interviews now at the city level for some major directors, and we have to ask someone who wants to be our treasurer. Not only do you know numbers, but how will you lead the people in your department? How will you go out there and do it? We don't interview our leaders well enough from an interview point of view. Are you a good leader? I happen to know Andrew and know him as a good person, right? I know Justin because I served with him for a short period of time. I rather like what I've seen so far of Jameet. I really would. I pick him to be the one I'd like to go for a beer with. That's for sure. Elizabeth and I were good friends because I let her sit at committee when other committee chairs wouldn't. But we had a lot of good times in Parliament. We did not believe in the same things. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we got along. We agreed to disagree and found the stuff the 80% that we did agree on. That's what these people should be charged with doing, and they need to do it. I love what you said, Professor, that sometimes if minority government is a penalty box, sometimes we've got to go to the penalty box for a little while. Right? I did not find minority government all that much fun. Sure. But we sure got stuff done.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? It was heavy. It's like going to the gym. Yep. I don't like going, but it works out if you do go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
One topic that really wasn't touchable, it was big in 2015 and certainly didn't seem to come across in the media this time around, is Indigenous issues. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think in the English leaders debate, we heard a fair amount of Indigenous issue commentary, but it was all about you didn't do enough or you're not going to do enough. It was
the downside.
It was
of what
the downside
didn't happen.
of the issue. I mean, I think it's really shameful that we still have all of these First Nations communities under boil water advisories. And I'll tell you, as a representative of London, we've got the technology right here in this city to fix this problem at the national level within a matter of months, if there's the political will to do it.
Well, I think
and inside that budget.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not an expensive
thing. I think every political party has addressed some of the atrocities that I think are First Nations. Right. And I can remember Jean Chrétien and even Pierre Trudeau before had essentially said that the Indian Act is broken. Right. And Chrétien used to say, maybe
now we're 30 years later, guess what?
Well, no, but Chrétien used to say, maybe it's time for them to learn how to make their own mistakes. I mean, we transfer $7 billion to $10 billion a year to 1.5 million people. And tell me why we still have water unsafe water.
Right.
Tell me why we can't build a housing.
Housing that's terrible, right.
Geez, you know, at the end of the day, I know that they have a hierarchy. I think everybody's addressed the big social issues surrounding the abuse that has occurred with regards to First Nations. And, you know, you've got a willing leadership, I think, there, but it's going to take a lot of political gumption in order to make things really change, and change has to happen. You can't keep
Well, I'm going to give credit
fixing
to
the existing system.
I'm going to give credit to the Green Party on this one, and I'm going to give credit
Yes.
particularly for an issue that matters to me as a municipal councillor as well. But Elizabeth May and the Greens were talking about a Council of Canadian Governments, a new structure that was going to give First Nations communities and municipalities a seat at the big kids table with the federal and the provincial governments. And really, that's what we need. We need the respect. Cities are the economic drivers of this country,
Yep.
and the First Nations communities deserve to have a seat at the table too, to talk about how the funds that we're going to flow to them are going to be spent that suit their communities.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth May was the only one who really addressed that during the leaders' debate. It wasn't addressed in a very long segment, but credit to the Greens for at least recognizing that there's a problem there.
But you
that
know,
they're
And
being
here's
put at the little kids' table instead of at the big kids' table.
But here's how I think that we got to that place. And this is a shout out to reading the platform, because we actually have an aspirational platform. We set out what we want Canada to look like in 2030. It's on the front page of the platform. Very simple, like it's the first thing you click on. And in any sport, you set a goal and then you take the steps necessary to get there. If we have a goal of cooperation, of equitable treatment of all of the people in Canada, then we take the steps necessary to get there. We don't do these things piecemeal. We don't do these things in a reactive way. We don't say, well, let's just do this because we're going to get elected next time. We have a goal that this is what we want our country to look like, and then we just make it happen.
But fundamental change takes a long time.
Yes.
I think people, municipally, provincially, federally, it's instant gratification. They think in 4 years, and I was in government, so was Joe, now you're in government, Sean, is that it takes sometimes way too long in order to get anything done.
It's glacial.
It is.
That's,
And federal
that's
level.
why you make a
I used to be
10-year goal. That's why you make a 20-year goal. You don't just make your platform based on the next 4 years.
But as long as there's progress, and we can talk about progress, every political party I know wants to do what's right for the First Nations.
Right.
Every one of them want to do, but it takes an awful long time, and it also will take a long time for them to accept the changes that are required for self-government.
But you
it's
can't,
not so easy.
Yeah, but I don't think you can get there unless you have a vision
Well, no, you
of
have
what
to
this
have a
looks
vision
like
and a plan,
10
of
years from
course.
now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now,
Yep.
and then you take the steps necessary
what's
to get
wrong
there.
with
But what
talking
Joe's
about
saying-
20-year plans and 30-year plans? Nothing, but people expect things to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it tomorrow,
I got to step in here for just a moment to take a look at a vision we have right now at the bottom of our screen. So currently we have the Liberals 25 projected, leading in 103, Conservatives 17 seats, leading in 83, Bloc 2, NDP 1, Green 1. Thoughts on that so far?
Well, I'll tell you,
We're
one
into
thing that
Ontario.
stands out, though, is that the Bloc is leading in another 26, and a real wild card in this minority government situation that it looks like we're headed towards is the resurgence of the Bloc Québécois.
How did we get back to a
Which-
separatist separatist party thinking, resurrecting? I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, serious.
and I think everybody
almost eliminated.
I think everybody underestimated, especially
Yeah.
the Liberals,
Yeah.
maybe even the Conservatives, about the Bloc. And I must admit, when you watch the French debate, the Bloc guy, and I can't even remember his name, and I'm not sure. I mean, he might hold the balance of power, and he doesn't have any members outside Quebec.
Right.
And he's a separatist.
Well, that's a
And they
valid
think-
point, because
No,
you
no,
look
but-
at the leading right now. The Bloc is leading in 25. The NDP are leading in 12. So you're right. The Bloc could
my
be the balance
point, you
of
know
power.
what the message
Everybody
was?
thought
but
after 2011 that Jack Layton had essentially slain the Bloc Québécois, and
Gone.
they're
No,
back.
But you know what? The only thing that guy did during the debate and during this whole campaign was to say, I'm going to be your voice, I'm going to fight like crazy, and you should vote for me. The Conservatives and Liberals
Wow, a
and
personality.
the NDP, yeah, exactly.
Right? Oh, vote for me
What could
because I'm
they
a
offer?
pretty good guy.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Okay, no, I get it, but you know, you're right. In the Parliament with the Quebec, when Jack took the 70-some seats, it was the Bloc was dead and gone. In this 4 years, they've been allowed to come back to this level where. Who's going to play ball now? I mean, they could have the balance of power, and who's using the Bloc as their...
Yeah.
And it's a really damning criticism of Prime Minister Trudeau's leadership, frankly, because, you know, they were on the ropes, they were dead, they were down and out, and for a Prime Minister who said he was going to do things differently...
Well, I know, but the Liberals are at least going to be in Quebec. Where's the Conservatives and the NDP? I mean, I didn't see them doing very, very much in there. So I agree that perhaps the Liberals always get complaints about the fact that they didn't do enough in Quebec in order to save our country. At one time I was there when we just about lost our country by one little 0.2%. Right?
Well, I'm not certain we're not leaning the same way in the West right now either, if you won't mind me bringing that up. We've segregated our country along the border of Manitoba in a big way, and
Western alienation is a real thing.
It's worse than the Quebec alienation. I often said I think that the Bloc Québécois in Quebec acts like it does so that it will get things. Not so that it will leave, not so that the rest of the country would say no, but so that because it worked out so much better for Quebec because they behaved in that way. Kind of a petulant child situation. I don't feel the same way about the Western provinces right now.
I know, but Joe, look at...
But wouldn't you also say there's an urban-rural divide?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
That's even a bigger one.
Ontario.
That's even a bigger one.
And I think if we look at the map later, we'll see in terms of Montreal, the Liberals will still have a strong presence there. The Bloc will do better in rural Quebec. In the West, the Liberals, the NDP will do well in the larger urban centres. The Conservatives will sweep the rural ridings, and that's a real divide that's out there.
It is. It's more of a populist thing.
But Joe, to your point about Western alienation, you know, when things were really good, and oil and gas were, you know, the price was good, and everybody was fine, and we were flourishing. And by the way, I like oil and gas, and yes, we have to transition out of it, but you can't do it tomorrow, right? But you know, it's like a family. You got 13 members around our family, and the Prime Minister. At some point in time, I remember when we had to save the fish in Newfoundland.
Remember?
And it cost $5 billion to do so. Now's Alberta's turn. I mean, they're going through some tough times. I've got an awful lot of friends and family out there that all of a sudden have lost their livelihoods, so to speak. And yes, the country came. We're buying a pipeline, $5 billion. We're trying to help that province through a difficult transition time of price of oil and price of gas. But that's what you do in a country. Everyone's going to have a problem at some point. Or federate. Absolutely.
Professor, do you want to weigh in on the...
I'm going to weigh in on the results, just to change the tone just a little bit. I mean, so just looking at across the results here, I mean, I'm seeing the Liberals are polling well above what they were in terms of most of the major national polls going into the election. At 37. The Conservatives are about bang on what the average would be of the polls. The Bloc is just a little bit below in terms of what their percentages were in Quebec. They were up as high as 30% in Quebec. This is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 25%, I'd bet, in Quebec. And the NDP is the big loser here, it looks to me. They're between 4 and 6 points lower than what the last averages were going into the election. So some of that's going to speak to the on-the-ground strength of the different parties. The Liberals, their get out the vote is clearly working today.
Wait till we get out west, where it's going to be 40, 45%, 50% for the Conservatives.
It's going to change a little bit, and the Conservatives will come up a little bit, but the NDP is still going to have some strength in some of the urban ridings in Vancouver for sure, and the lower mainland more generally. But they are polling a little lower than I would have anticipated.
Greens
but that might speak
9%,
to some of the strength of the party in terms of the ability to get out the vote. Which, I mean, is not surprising given that, you know, there was concerns for the NDP a couple months ago that, you know, they were headed to absolute oblivion, and they've had a great campaign, but their on-the-ground strength organizationally may not be there just
remember
yet.
we said 140?
I would suggest
we're at 138 right now. I don't know where all those polls are coming from, because we only have the the top line, right? So we don't know. In Southwestern Ontario,
The rest of the
around London, I
leading
haven't
is
seen much.
some of the Ontario
If we look
polls
at
coming in.
Oxford, Oxford right now, the Conservatives are leading over the Liberals.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that? And we'll see
No,
shortly. Karen Vecchio's
Boy,
taking
something
a
like
big
400
lead
or
in-
something.
here
David's
she
been a
is here.
good MP.
Saga Middlesex, Karen Vecchio's
up by
taking a large
almost
lead.
600,
Yeah.
so-
Thoughts on that?
No surprise.
No
Expected?
surprise
You
there.
work
Right.
hard, you get rewarded. I'd like to think that's the case. And Karen, to talk about Karen or Dave, Dave McKenzie was up there. Dave's been there a long time and has done some really good work and was the police chief in Woodstock before he went to Parliament. So, well-respected man in town, and I'd like to think hard work gets you there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm actually not expecting any changes in local ridings tonight.
In the 10 ridings.
I think that when you look across it, particularly the immediate London ridings, and I count Elgin Middlesex as part of that, of course, because
Right,
they
because
are.
it's in London. Right.
I think we're going to have one orange,
No
one
doubt.
blue, and two red at the end of the night,
But you
just
know,
the
London,
same way we started.
London Fanshawe, I must admit, I don't know.
They haven't headed up.
Irene's daughter. The only thing I know is that, the NDP was trying to, cancel the GDLS contract, and I know, the reasons and so on and so forth, and even renegotiate NAFTA.
Well, and that's one of
and
the
at
ones
end of
where I
the day,
disagree with my party on.
Yeah, in London Fanshawe, at the end of the day, it was a strong Liberal riding with Pat O'Brien
Back to Pat's day,
way
sure.
back when. But obviously the name Matheson makes a difference. I was really impressed with Mohammed. I went out with him a couple of times. Was very, very smart, spoke to some of the issues, but Irene Matheson, or her daughter, the Matheson name is unbelievable. Irene was a good MP, a good representative, good constituency person.
Well, and there's where
we
the
now
local
have the
candidate
Conservatives
thing matters,
leading
right?
in elected seats.
Uh-huh.
Yes, we do.
Well, as we move into the West, that may
That has taken a jump.
move up
The tides have
considerably. I think
turned.
we're starting to get some Ontario results here, certainly rural Ontario results, where the Conservative
Well,
seat
you've got
count
103
will
to
climb.
144. 103
No, agreed. It's only 103 to 130 something,
Yep.
but that
Yeah.
seems to have stopped. So
Yep.
we'll see what happens now as the professor said, as the percentages move up as we cross through Ontario and
Yep.
into Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. We're going to see.
Well, we'll keep
good work, Karen.
Ralph Goodale in Saskatchewan, I think. We might keep one or two in Edmonton. I think we'll keep maybe one in Manitoba, one or two. And then BC is going to be,
It's a 50-50 split from the numbers I saw today.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
well, that's what I thought. We may be waiting. If that tightens up across the prairie, we may be waiting to see BC to make a decision on whose minority or whose tight majority it might be. So.
Yep.
But I like you. I'm disappointed in the NDP numbers at this point. I expected that to be another 10 from where it is at this point in the country. Now, perhaps in Metro Toronto, that may change to some degree. Certainly the talk was where they'd come from since the writ was dropped, where Jamid has brought them, what has happened there. Whether it doesn't look like the ground game was the same as the media game. So let's see how it does. We'll see if it starts to move up now in metro in urban Ontario.
Well, and we just saw the first set of results.
We're going to have some local results coming up on full screen. We'll be starting with Oxford for us to comment on shortly. As soon as the screen, but there we go. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, London. So
there's
Oxford,
Oxford there.
we expected that to be
he's
that
elected,
that
sure.
way.
Yeah. Still early numbers too, though, for the balance. Comments on Elgin Middlesex?
Yeah,
London?
well,
no
as
surprise.
expected.
I love her dearly,
Yeah,
so
it's,
No surprise.
yeah. And look, I met the Liberal candidate in Elgin Middlesex, London, and I'm the mayor of St. Thomas and did not meet any of the other candidates.
Yeah.
Not the Green candidate, not the NDP candidate. They just weren't present
That's
in
my
the
riding.
community.
Lent and Kent Middlesex.
Yeah. Well, that's Bev Shipley's old riding.
Yes.
And Bev Shipley was another on-the-ground former municipal politician, came in and held it
North
really
Center,
well.
we've got Peter Fragaskatos 300, Conservative
polls.
at 179, and NDP at And it's
Well, in early numbers, but no surprise.
Yeah.
Peter's
About the-
another one
about
who
the
just
portion.
works hard.
Yeah.
Hardworking
Young's-
MP.
Oh, no, that's
very-
almost,
well, and
I
that's
thought
not
that Kate would
surprising
do it.
either.
No,
I
I
think
didn't
Kate,
think so.
Kate's been
closer.
shown as a hardworking.
Is Snellgrove closer than anyone expected, or is that about what?
Well, people
you
thought
would
it was going to be
expect?
much closer. I don't
I
think
thought
so.
so,
I think
yeah.
We thought it could go.
Yep.
Right?
Okay, well, we are
course-
still early at 25 polls.
Yeah, and with all of these, it depends on what parts of the riding
We are only-
the numbers
yeah.
have come in
Yeah,
from,
right.
Agreed.
because there are
So
pockets
here's
in the
London
riding.
Fanshawe for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
Not
Ooh.
a walk away yet for
Michael's
anybody.
rather
That's
closer
Michael's
than I
holding
thought.
steady there also. So you're right. It's let's wait and let's see a few more polls there before any of us get too excited. But it's a good first showing for Lindsay.
and back to Oxford. So no big surprises locally then?
Nope.
from
No,
anyone?
it looks like Oxford and,
All
and
could have
Elgin
been predicted
Middlesex
this
are,
way so far.
Yeah.
How about the rest of Southwestern Ontario? Oh, well, we're not covering Windsor, which is going to be an interesting sort of.
There
city,
is
right?
something to play there with Sandra Pupatella coming into to Windsor Tecumseh with Brian Massey there.
Yeah.
And Brian's been there a long time and another
I've worked with
really
him.
strong
Yeah, absolutely.
parliamentarian.
But Sandra's been was an effective provincial.
Yeah, she's a
minister
fighter.
member,
Right.
right? So what are we doing there? That's 101 now to 140 or 139.
I think if you look at the numbers at the bottom of the screen, though, that's the
Yeah.
case for electoral reform right there. Because we've had this debate already about who's going to hold the balance of power. And it potentially is not going to be the party that is in third place.
Just an update, we've just been told that Dave McKenzie has been declared for Oxford
Oh,
County.
great.
And
Congrats,
should have
Dave.
been with those numbers, so that's
Yeah.
great.
What could be troubling, and I guess we'll have to wait till the end of the night, though, that if the and I'm sure that the NDP will pick up a lot more than what they're elected and leading in 19 right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that remember we were talking at the beginning of the show how many seats between differential between the Liberals and Conservatives, and who essentially
And-
may be holding the real balance
Balance
of
of
power.
power.
Yeah.
I get a little concerned with the bloc there. Is what 33?
33 seats right
33?
now, elected or leading.
Yeah.
And that's about where
Yep.
we had them
Yeah.
in this.
Yep.
So no real surprise there. But with 6.3%, that translates to about what in Quebec?
It'd be close to 30%.
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah.
So that it's a strong showing.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's setting them up, the Bloc Québécois, to hold the balance of power, short of the Conservatives supporting
Which means that
Liberals.
the NDP couldn't have kept many, and the Conservatives didn't pick up money, because I don't know how many of the Liberals we had. Close to in Quebec.
At the
had,
writ drop, the
yeah.
Conservatives had 95 seats. If that holds true, they've already picked up a few. The
Well, we
Liberals
had
had
40.
177 seats, and
Yep.
so
But we had
they're
40
going to
in
lose
Quebec.
some. Obviously, we knew that
Yep.
was going to be the case.
Yeah.
We had 40 in Quebec, and the PCs had 11, and the NDP had 14.
Okay.
Right. The NDP at the writ drop had somewhere around 40 seats.
Latest
39
results,
seats.
sorry for interrupting. Kate Young has been declared in London West.
Okay.
Oh, congrats!
Congratulations, Kate.
Yep.
Yep.
Sorry, we'll let you go back to.
Yeah, so look, I think the hope was with the resurgence of the NDP in the last week or two of the campaign that they might get back to where they were in that 30 to 40 seat range when the writ dropped. If that was the case, then they would certainly hold a balance of power, regardless of who carried the day. The issue is they haven't. And so now the 30-some seats that the Bloc are carrying in Quebec are going to be very meaningful
Yep.
seats.
Well, I'm just
in
looking
getting
here,
things
and
done in Canada.
the only
Karen
place
Vecchio appears to have been declared in Elgin Middlesex, London.
Good work.
that's a
Way
pretty
to go.
safe
Yep.
declaration.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we can applaud that one.
Yes.
Okay, I did. All right.
And
She
Kate.
is. She's lovely.
I'll applaud
Yeah.
Karen too.
She's a lovely person.
2 women so far.
Oh yeah,
been
well,
declared.
that's, and it sure
And
looks
now
like.
Lambton, Kent, Middlesex. We
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
have Rude running
Rude,
in the head
yeah.
at this point. And London North.
That's a
Centre,
tougher
Peter Fergus,
race than I
Scott.
thought it would
Me
be in
too.
London North.
Yeah, no,
Close.
Right? So-
Absolutely. That's a surprise.
But we're only at
But we don't know
13
what
polls
parts.
there.
And
Yeah.
you're right.
That's
It has
surprise.
some drastically different
That's
areas.
my old riding.
in the riding,
Yeah.
but truly no real huge surprises.
No,
There's a
no.
number of differences perhaps, but no huge surprises. And that's not a huge surprise either, except for
Nope.
the
Yeah.
the liberal and
Conservative, dead
conservative
heat.
lines there.
Yep.
Yeah.
146 now.
And that's just going to grow. So.
Yeah. So, and of course, party we're sitting now, Conservative still sitting elected in 48, leading in 58, 32%.
But the percentages are starting to catch each other.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
they're getting
as was said
closer.
earlier, the
36,
conservative
32.
percentages are about where they ended the day on most people's polls,
Yeah.
32.
and they haven't yet headed into large conservative country. So I expect that number to grow a fair bit across the
What
prairies,
time is it?
although the numbers don't add to a
It
great
is,
deal of percent. But the liberal number
10:30.
continues to slip
Oh, sorry.
now down into
Yeah,
35.
here.
Well, and
10:30
as
here.
we've moved from
Alberta's
Quebec into
8:30, so
Ontario,
they still have
places
an
like
hour.
Grey Bruce
Yep.
and Sound, those numbers
Just
are
doubled
starting
in
to come
big.
in. And
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I get
Manitoba
it
might,
for sure.
Manitoba might be in there, but Alberta's still 8:30.
Yeah, we're
an
just
hour
closing
away.
in
Closing, yeah.
Alberta
Yeah.
then?
Yeah.
So we'll start to see some of that.
It looks to me like Ruth Ellen Brosseau is going to continue to represent the
Okay.
NDP in Quebec. So
That is very good.
very happy to see
I
Ruth
could tell you
Ellen.
some fun stories.
I bet you
served
could.
on
She was a fun MP.
we served on agriculture committee together, but I was Uncle Joe to a number of that group of NDP members of parliament that came in that election. I found when I went to parliament, there wasn't anybody who actually told us where the bathrooms were, or the
Right.
pencils were and stuff. So I took it on myself to be orientation for a lot. And up until when I left in 2015, 4 years later, many of them were still coming to me for routine stuff. Joe, I've got a private member's bill. What do I do with this? That, you know, and Ruth Ellen was one of them. Of course, and I won't tell you we didn't give her a hard time when she first showed up in parliament. She had won a seat without ever visiting a riding, had gone to Las Vegas during the campaign, was the bar manager at the bar at University of Ottawa, and
That's good training
there would be
ground for
occasions
politics,
she
right?
would get up in the house and somebody would order some wings. But that was the
But there's an
good-natured
example
heckling.
of somebody who really
Turning
worked
it,
in her riding.
turning it into a
and became that
constituency politician.
constituency.
To this day and age, winning an NDP seat in Quebec at this block pressure,
Yep.
and she's in a very block area
Yes.
of Quebec. I'm proud to say she's my
rural
friend.
parts of the riding.
Yeah.
It's not a big urban seat. It's a very large rural seat.
Absolutely, a large
very
unilingually
francophone.
French. Right? Yeah. She turned her language skills around, turned her whole work ability. This is what tells you is somebody can get to Parliament, and sometimes it's easier for some than others, but you're still going to have to work to keep it.
Okay.
She's worked to
We're
keep
just
it.
doing a recap now with the graphics. So Karen Vecchio
Yep.
has been declared for Elgin Middlesex London. Kate Young declared for London West, with Snellgrove's
15%
Done well.
vote, yes. Dave?
Dave McKenzie declared for Oxford.
Right?
And that is it for updates at this
If we-
stage. So we're back to the bottom numbers.
If we look across the country now, we're really talking, it's starting to get to 150. And I certainly see the road to 150 from the Conservatives as we hit the prairies, right? The rest here is really going to come to BC, I think, as to if we enter BC in a reasonably tight race. There may even be a small majority in it for someone at that point because of where the NDP and Green have gone here, right? So
I would be surprised if the Greens do not pick up 2 or 3 seats.
I think
at
2 or 3
least
more in
BC.
BC.
I think in the lower mainland, the NDP will certainly come in
Right.
with a few seats.
But
in the
those are
Greater
seats the
Vancouver
Liberals
area.
held. And so from a conservative
taking them from
outlook point of view, I'm
conservatives.
taking that outlook to say, okay, win 4, win 5 if they're
we had
taking the
17.
seats.
We had 17.
Right.
And I thought that we were going to lose about 5 or 6
Yeah, well.
in BC.
Well, it'll look
you
like
know?
that'll be important if we get there. This is tight for Peter Fragastanos.
It's still very
he's
close, yeah.
significantly ahead,
Yeah.
but it's tighter
Now
than
we
I
have
thought it
like
would
200 polls to report there still,
Yeah.
so. And we're in the same position in London Fanshawe. Lindsay Matheson has a good lead for the NDP, but it's only 20 polls reporting. So
be. Yeah. But that's a significant percentage to see even this early. That it's tough to overcome that. Well, there are 800 votes at that.
which is
at
what
23.
Irene won by the first time around.
800
so.
votes, yes.
we called that a landslide back then.
I won by 200 in 1988 against Jim Jepson. Nice man, bless his heart. So
my lowest margin was 5,000 against Garnutsa in 2004.
Okay.
So it's
You're very good
the
at
next
being a
election, I won by
politician.
12,000.
I didn't know that until that night.
wonderful.
I had no idea what to expect till that night. I had not done this before, and it was. Yeah, so now we're at 35.4 for the Liberal on percentage of popular vote. Now up to 32.7 on the Conservative side, heading into a very conservative area of the country. So,
but they've got a base of 143 so far.
no, agreed.
If everything
It's a
stays
solid.
in.
It's a solid number
Yeah,
there. Right?
Yeah, I'm surprised the NDP.
I take it
So
Max
21.
did not win his own riding, since we're well past Quebec, and the polling numbers there do not show a seat. So.
What's interesting about London North Centre is the NDP is polling very strongly in second, and I think that perhaps shows, because at the provincial level they have an NDP member of the provincial parliament.
It shows that the machine's there.
Exactly right. The on the ground
London
strength of the party.
Fanshawe, even though the Matheson name is well known, that's Armstrong's.
Well, all of our
Teresa
MPPs
Armstrong's,
in London are NDPs.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
London is a fascinating city.
Well, and Joe, it always has been.
It's always been liberal or conservatives.
There's
or
always
NDP
been a
and all that.
sprinkling. It's never been all of us.
No, exactly.
Never been all one party, and we've had to at least fly on those airplanes with each other. Right?
And those are some tight quarters, so you have to be friendly on those little Dash 8s.
Those two dogs that go out to fight and punch the time clock, and then they're buddies. It was always that way coming home.
Yeah.
It's Friday night. Come on, let's have a beer and some peanuts on the plane.
Yes.
Yeah, the Dash 8, the most comfortable plane in the world for a man my size.
33. That block.
So what are your thoughts on the bloc potentially being the balance of power in a minority government?
It makes it very difficult for whoever has the majority of seats between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
I'm hoping that you don't need the bloc.
Yeah.
Well, that's I think what both Mr. Scheer and Mr. Trudeau are hoping.
Right?
Joe, you had a minority government. I don't know where the bloc was in that balance. I remember one of ours where the bloc truly could have been the balance, but I mean, all you heard from across the way is, "Are you in bed with the separatists?"
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it kind of kept you out of making deals with them to get a piece of legislation through. You would probably pull the legislation to some degree and try and work on stuff that the rest of the House could vote on. We passed budgets in minority governments. It can be done. You have to put a little water in your wine, as you said.
But
whether
it's very
some
hard
for
to
housing.
govern, though, when your dance partner is somebody who wants to break up the country.
Agreed. What do you offer them?
But
What do you offer
outside,
them?
separatism.
A passport? I mean, what do you?
Separatism has not been an issue for the past 10 or 15
No,
years.
it's been a full
It was dead
full
and gone,
decade.
right? And I'm not sure that they resurrected separatism again. But the fact that they've got 33 seats is going to be problematic, only from the standpoint, because most of them, when it comes to legislation and so on, you got to negotiate with every party. They're part of the committees and so on and so forth.
Yep.
But it's it's whether or not they have the balance of power. They're going to demand certain things for Quebec. But Quebec doesn't want pipelines.
Right.
Quebec doesn't want. I think they're ahead of the curve with regards to climate change in terms of where they want to go and so on. So there's this Bill 21, which scares the daylights out of me, and yet nobody wanted to say anything until such time as the court decided, we'll make a decision as to whether or not it's constitutional or not. And I wouldn't be surprised if that government didn't turn around and use the notwithstanding clause, which is dangerous as
They've
heck.
used it in the past.
But tell me you can't, to suggest that what you wear and how you look, you can't be, you can't work for the government, you can't do this, come on, that's not Canada. It might be Quebec, at least that's what they say, that 60 or 70% of the people agree with that particular policy, but I think that that's dangerous for the country.
Well, I see in London North Centre.
We've got some full numbers again.
My goodness.
So, yeah.
And congratulations, Lindsay, on that for parts of that fight. But I'm looking at the next two, saying, if this indeed is a a practice run for 6 months or a year or 18 months from now,
It's gonna
there's
be a
some pretty
three-horse
good
race.
numbers up there for somebody who wants to stick around and
Yep.
try again.
Yep.
Right. I see Leanne's pulling ahead here
Yes.
in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, and I suppose they'll call that pretty soon, I would think.
Well, and of course in London Fanshawe, the General Dynamics deal could still be a big
Yeah.
Issue
wedge
at some point.
in,
Yep.
in a campaign
Yes.
Yep.
18 months from now.
Yep.
Well, it's a lot closer and tighter than people might have thought. That's only, what, 10% of the vote. But it's like a
it's-
three-way race.
That's a
except
pretty
that
good
Lindsay,
sampling
yeah.
for
Sure.
that would and
Well, and Peter's lead is starting to open up now.
now
North
you're starting to
Center.
get into some
Yeah,
areas.
we've
that-
added some
yeah.
5 new polls there, and not a surprise that Peter's opening up his lead.
Now, just to our bottom numbers, there's been some updates. We're now seeing the popular vote 33% for the Conservative to 34.9 for the Liberals. So that's dropping.
Just dropped past 35. So
Still 145 seats, though.
no, agreed. It's right
gonna-
where
it's
you
gonna be-
said.
exactly, it's gonna be- no, no, but
They
it's
just
gonna
gotta
be
hold them
interesting
down,
to go west.
to the other
Yeah.
coast.
Yeah.
Right?
It could be a
We're still
really
within your
interesting
number.
scenario,
Yeah,
though,
yeah.
where the party with the most seats has a lower percentage of the popular vote.
Agreed, or vice versa. Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody
Right.
with a higher percentage of popular votes doesn't
Ends up
carry
with
the
fewer
day,
seats,
right?
yeah.
Because of
Hillary
the mass-
Clinton had 3 million more votes than
Right.
Mr.
Yeah, but
What's
they
his
have,
name?
but they have a Republican and,
Oh
and another
man,
system.
they've got a weird
Yeah.
system that you have to you have to win every state. Oh,
Well, that's as it slowly creeps across the country. We have a big, wide country, and this is going to have a lot more stories left for today.
Yeah.
You're up all night. You're not going to be able to go to bed.
Well, I've already done city council today. I've done my civic duty. Now I'm doing my national duty.
Well, I have Civic Works Committee tomorrow at 4, so as long as we've got the results in by then, so that I can
not like the
committee.
city of London the day
That was
after,
the,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
the longest election in history.
So we
exciting,
do
though.
have an update that Andrew Scheer has won his seat in Regina.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Blanchette has
So
also...
we're getting some prairie vote into this
Yeah.
then, if that's the case.
And Blanchette
Yeah.
for the Bloc did secure his seat as well in Quebec.
Oh, okay.
And we've moved the Libs back over to the most seats now. We're tied with the Conservatives for 68
Yeah.
and elected. All right. About a 27 vote different in the leading,
leading.
or 27 seat difference in the leading.
Yep.
So we were
It
interested
is
earlier
going to
in,
be tough.
in Windsor,
Right.
Yes.
and I was just taking a look. Windsor-Tecumseh is actually very close. That's an NDP seat, and it's only 200 votes, not even 200 votes separating Cheryl and Eirik Kuzmarazik, whose name I probably just massacred.
Right.
Sorry about that, but very close
That's
race there.
Tecumseh.
And
What
in
about
Windsor
West?
West,
Yeah.
Brian Massey has a lead over Sandra Pupatello.
He does still?
Yes. We're looking at about a 600 vote lead there for Brian.
Okay.
And that's with, well, looks like about half the polls reported
Oh.
there. You gotta love social media.
And we're just
Yeah.
running... Yeah.
Yeah, seeing the Bloc result there, I'm
Right.
just looking as well, and they're polling almost 35% in Quebec, which is, and they're a couple points ahead of the Liberals in Quebec. So
That's
that
an
is,
but that's
that says
36
that
now.
story about
Yeah.
them being ahead of the Liberals,
Yeah.
but really the absence of the NDP vote in
sure.
Quebec then
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Well, and the Conservatives have
Well,
dropped off
you know,
over the.
we
over
didn't
this-
start in
this-
there heavy with only 11 to go.
Fair-
but
fair enough. Yeah.
And I don't know what the number is.
Yeah.
10. They're up 26.
Yeah, sure, if you need to sneak out.
Okay.
Yeah, the Conservatives are polling about 18% in Quebec.
18?
18%.
Well, I think that's a better number than the last
Yeah.
one I
Yeah,
read. So
yeah. The Bloc about 34%.
it doesn't turn into seats in Quebec at that
Yeah,
number, but
although they've got
around
10
the Quebec district.
10 seats is
10
what they've
seats, so we left with 11
leading
in
or
Quebec,
elected.
I think. So
Yeah, yeah.
okay, well then, no pain.
Well, yeah, they're down. Looks like they're down 2 in Quebec.
Two.
The Conservatives.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, I might have been counting Max.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And the People's Party is.
So who
Not
did?
yet.
Does anybody know who won both?
No.
I'd assume it was a Conservative split and became a Bloc seat.
So what do you see as the cause of the loss of NDP support in Quebec? Which is it just the rise of the notion of the separatist
Well,
notion?
it truly is the Bloc. I mean,
really
it
what's
really
taken it
does.
away.
The Bloc is very similar in policy to the NDP in Quebec, but they're better understood than the NDP from a language and
The last
Quebecois point of view.
The last two NDP leaders, Mr. Mulcair and Jack, of course,
Carried the day.
They were very popular in Quebec, and they were Quebecers. At the end of the day, they were people that the people of Quebec could relate to. Jagmeet Singh is a downtown Toronto boy, and that's just not going to carry the day as well in Quebec. So it comes down to your local candidate at that point.
Yeah.
And I do think in the context of Quebec, I know we've spoken about separatism. I mean, I've not seen it as I mean, although they are a separatist party, I'm not sure that the rhetoric has necessarily been about separatism
Right.
as much as it has been about a strong voice for Quebec in Ottawa, in Ottawa for Quebec. I do also think that we can't discount the section, Bill 21, the secularism law that we've already discussed. But I think that particularly in light of Mr. Singh, I mean, clearly his appearance has very clear religious appearance, and that runs very counter to a very popular law in Quebec, being Bill 21. So I think it's perhaps a mix of a strong voice for Quebec. The secular liberalism bill, and Blanchette, the leader, has done, I think, led the party surprisingly well through the campaign.
What was the word on how did Jagmeet Singh do in the French debates? Because that's where you really need to get that message across if he's going to take block vote. And I'd not read. I mean, the English language debates burned him, won him. You know, he did a great job, but I'd not heard the opposite on the French language debates. And I would guess now that Jagmeet will know he's got to spend some time in the province of Quebec to build that party back there. The NDP held some 70 seats there in just 2 elections ago, and so you know the base is there.
The base is absolutely there. Jack Layton showed that there is a potential for New Democrats to succeed in Quebec, but it has to have a special attention by the leader, because the reality in Quebec is different than it is in Ontario. It's different than it is out west, and you really have to understand. I mean, even, in fact, I think it actually hurt Elizabeth May early in the campaign when she was talking about sovereignist versus separatist, and there's a lot of layers to understanding the Quebec voter, and it's not a simple equation, and Jagmeet is going to have to spend some time there, absolutely.
Sure.
I just wonder, also going back to what we were talking about before, do these big debates really influence votes anymore? If we admit from earlier in the conversation that people are just turned off this kind of behavior, are people really basing their vote on this kind of theater?
Well, I don't think the English language debate got that. But I was just wondering, did the French language debate stay more to issue? And I didn't really watch the translated version of it. So, right? And did anybody on the ground do that? That's the other question, right? So,
just an update. It appears as Bernier is losing his seat.
In Beauce?
In Beauce, and currently it is the Conservative candidate who is in the lead.
Wow, that'd be a tough carry with Maxime there, right? But way to go. I think that's the end of the People's Party of Canada. Should Maxime not win his seat, I didn't get that there was a real leadership plateau in that party other than Maxime. So I would guess that will be the end of that.
We can hope that's
well.
And local results are still coming in Oxford yet.
Wow. It's
And
well over 50%.
yes.
Has route been declared in Lambton, Kent?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah, and that's widening in London North now too. Peter's starting to show.
Oh. Michael Van Holst has come in.
Michael Van Holst has
second place.
moved into second place in London
yeah.
Fanshawe.
But he hasn't a cross-party
Well, and
liking
again,
there too. He ran as a local.
we come back
Councillor?
to what polls are coming in, right?
Right.
And he's a ward councillor.
Right, so
I
there's
assume
people-
that as the votes are coming in Ward 1, where he was elected as a councillor, he's got some real support in the London Fanshawe riding. So
He once ran against me in Elgin Middlesex, London. Michael ran as an independent in the 2006 election, I think, in Elgin Middlesex, London. We've
those
been
were
friends
the 8
ever
votes
since.
that you didn't get that campaign.
Yeah,
for?
we've been friends ever since because we really did. Well, I find him a funny guy. He does comedy pretty well, and I do some stand-up comedy too. So
But the other story there is that Lindsay's
Yes.
gap is starting to
Really,
widen as
really.
well, and I think it won't be long before we're declaring the other 2 London ridings. It looks like.
yes. We're now under 1 point difference in the popular vote. However, according to that number, you're at 150 elected and leading for the Liberals.
And I'd also note that the Greens are leading
In
or
two
elected
more.
in 2 more,
more, yeah.
which I
where
presume
are we
would be. I presume those would be in BC.
No, BC's
We- yeah, I
not
don't-
yet.
BC closed at,
Oh, did they? Okay.
would they have closed at 10:30?
Yes?
I think. Well, I'll have a quick.
Yeah.
I think that it's
Yeah.
they're probably BC results here.
Yeah, there are some early results from BC coming in now.
Well,
In BC there.
Well, that's no surprise. That's
Yep.
wonderful news.
I don't know which ridings they are. I assume it's Elizabeth Mays.
Yeah, there's 3.
yeah.
Alrighty. So we're back to bottom numbers, and we're seeing that gap in the popular
Right.
vote close between the Liberals and the Conservatives. But the numbers are still in around what Joe Fontana
150.
you had suggested.
Yeah.
Actually, a little higher at this
What do
point.
you
Yeah,
get if
they
you?
lie.
What does
Yeah.
he get for winning?
Our undying gratitude and love forever, and he's
The
had that
centrifuge.
He
anyway.
gets to
over
pick
yet.
up the tab when
It's
we
not
all go
over
out
yet.
after
Yeah,
the
exactly.
podcast here. So
So no big surprises yet tonight, then.
Well, I will say that I'm surprised that the NDP is not
Yeah.
polling higher.
Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
That's
my surprise. I think we expected if on the day the writ was dropped, that was about where the numbers were, and
Yeah.
it had really grown from there. And it's surprising that it's there again, right, to me.
well, and I would say that, honestly, for both the NDP and the Greens, that they're lower than when the campaign started.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's got to be a concern for them. Now, is that the fear factor of, anybody but Scheer, or is that, just that they weren't resonating with people because they got lost in the battle between the Liberals and the
But
Conservatives?
assuming that it ends up this way at 150 for the Liberals, thank God the NDP is going to have 24.
Enough to put over.
And that would be enough.
But
and
Josh-
not have to rely on the bloc.
Right.
Give me a break.
Yeah.
Update: Justin Trudeau has been declared the winner in his seat.
In
Papineau.
Is that right for him?
Oh, now we're back to the Liberals in second place in Fanshawe.
Okay, so we've got a race to watch there. It's not Lindsay's race, but it's the rest of it.
Well, and the gap narrowed a little bit, but as we're starting to get more and more polls
Right.
coming in.
I'm going to have to say that I think that the Green message resonated with everybody because clearly we had to talk about what we have been talking about for the last 20 years. Every single party this time had to talk about it.
Mainstream,
I
though,
put this
right?
down every
Yeah.
time to it's a close election and it feels good, and then when we get to the poll, we just can't take a chance on
But
going back.
you're absolutely right. But I can only take Elgin Middlesex London is the one I watched, and the Green candidate wasn't at anything. So it's hard to take the day there or to even improve the ability to win it in
Understood.
the next election or the one after if we don't take the day today. And it may not be a victory, and I mean many of my friends up there, Dave McKenzie, I think he had to run twice before he was ever elected as a member of parliament. Bev Shipley did a similar thing against very strong candidates. And I think that's part of the ground game if I could ever give advice to Elizabeth, I would give it.
But you
Yeah.
know,
That's part of the
And I
advice.
think,
is
like-
concentrate on a small area and win them solidly, and move, and then move out
And
from that.
that's generally what the strategy is. In this
Right.
election, unfortunately, I had a crisis, and that's why I'm on this
Right.
panel tonight, as opposed
and not
to
up there under the
Yes,
leading or winning.
exactly.
but you know what? I think, because I don't know what that Ontario number is, that must have been a determining factor for the Liberals and not for the Conservatives,
Yeah.
and not for the NDP, which, everybody said was going to be where, in fact,
Metro
this
Toronto
election was
with
going to,
the-
right?
the
And so
GTA.
yeah, because I think everything else is playing out as expected. Maybe the Bloc a little higher, the NDP a lot lower, but it means that Doug Ford might have been a factor in this election in Ontario.
Oh.
Well, we certainly talked about him.
Well,
He got
the
more
leader of the
mentions than
Liberal
anything
Party
else.
thought he was running, apparently.
Yeah.
But it's,
I like that one line during
Yeah.
the campaign.
Yeah.
You keep talking about these provincial things.
that position is still open for him, should he like to go for it.
It's going to be interesting to see how some of these close races play out tomorrow morning. Even
Yeah.
looking back at Windsor again, Windsor-Tecumseh, the vote spread is 64 votes, with 170 of 253 polls recorded.
Wow, that's a tight
That's
race.
a tight
Yeah,
race.
there.
So
That's a don't go to bed yet.
Yeah.
some candidates are going to have very late nights tonight, and
Well, I
The-
think
the
we all
candidates
know,
in BC
we
have a
all
long
know
way to go.
some of those landslide candidates that we've seen before.
Yes.
I know of a friend of mine who conceded and went to bed and woke up as the winner. So
I can't remember. Bloomfield won for us back in 1980 with about 7 or 8, or
Yeah.
Terry Clifford.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think won by about 7 or 8 votes
Yeah.
or something like that. Right?
yeah, you have to. Well, and in many of the of these ridings, specifically the rural ones, the advance poll is counted last, and often it's a fairly
Yeah,
good sized
yeah,
chunk
yeah,
of votes. And so
absolutely.
you think I've lost. I've lost by
Yep.
40. I'm not making that up with only one poll.
Yep.
And then the advance poll comes in, and by the way, you've won by 400 or something because
Right.
you did a great job of getting the advance poll out. So it's one of these. Pay attention and work hard to the last day. Right? It truly,
Exactly.
Yeah.
it truly is that. It is a ground game. All right.
Yep.
Yeah,
well, it
it's
goes
true.
right back to what Brona was saying earlier in the broadcast. It's about connecting with people on the doorstep. You go
Yep.
till the last minute
Yep.
on the last night of the campaign, knocking on as many doors and shaking hands and talking to as many people as you can, because
Well, and any
it's that
candidate
connection
that-
that matters.
Yeah, any candidates I've taught, I said you go to bed 100 points up and wake up 100 points behind.
I think that's.
And then you get up and go at it again.
But like now, admitting that is what I said, I think that when we think about that's what wins elections, I think that we have to really look at, is that style of campaigning accessible for people?
Matheson has been declared for London Fanshawe.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
There we go.
Because I just don't see, like, we're the way we
And
have our
Frank
political
Escados
game
has
working
been
right
declared
now.
for London North Centre.
We ultimately are excluding a lot of voices of people who don't have those kind of resources, who don't have a big party machine, and who don't have the ability, like a single mom like me, to make that kind of commitment. And then
Other
we're
than
not
the
getting
last
those
one, I'm
voices
not-
heard in government, in high levels of government. So is there some other way to encourage people like me to get involved in politics? Is there some other way to support those people getting their message out there? I think that there is a bigger conversation that we need to have about, if we want a government that's speaking for everybody, what kind of changes can we make? Because there's not a lot of people that don't look like this panel that I'm seeing up here.
Only thing I can say is that if the Liberals do win
Leanne Root has
tonight-
been declared in Lambton, Middlesex.
All right.
Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Yeah, that if the Liberals do win, infrastructure programs for the municipalities, for
Will
both
stay
you,
in-
Sean, are at least going to stay in place. The only
Well,
thing
and I would think with any of them in the minority, that's going to
Yeah,
be a better
exactly.
a better way. of
Hopefully,
going.
it will encourage the governing party to get the money out the door faster for us.
Oh no!
I hope so.
Yeah, that's always been the issue,
There's some
right?
municipal guys talking now.
When you talk about a 1,000-page application for an affordable housing project, it's very hard to.
And you know, municipalities that I used to
Access
say
those
this as the
funds.
mayor, we can't operate cities and towns on 9 cents on the tax dollar anymore. I
Well,
mean,
and that's where we are.
ridiculous,
60% of the infrastructure
Yeah.
and 10 cents of every tax dollar.
Well,
used
and
to say
especially
that
as
the-
housing has started to become
So-
such a large.
So we're going to do a short recap, and then we're
Popular
going to
votes,
call it.
interesting.
Okay. the popular vote is
some
about
reaction.
equal now. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to say the feds have all the money, the province has all the power, and the municipalities
Has
have
to do all the work.
all the work and have all the problems, right?
There is something to be said there. So Dan, almost no surprises in Southwestern Ontario in the 5 or 6 ridings that we've really been watching here tonight at Rogers. Across the country, as we said, a couple of somewhat surprises as to where some of the percentages are. Some may even themselves out a little bit more as we pass through BC.
Any reaction to London Fan Shop results?
No, I mean, name recognition does help.
I'm surprised that the Conservatives have moved into second there. I mean, it's still a close race. That could be an either or. I thought it was more of an NDP Liberal contest.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that Lindsay's been declared. I expected that. And I mean, that speaks to...
And they've got a long way to go still at 57 polls. These numbers are all going to go up. But
But she's been declared, so that's...
and so now the work for Lindsay will begin tomorrow on convincing voters that, hey, we're in a minority. And when this next campaign comes, now she's going to have to fill those very small, big shoes that her mother has left behind, who's been a fantastic rep.
Yes.
So looking forward to working with her, certainly for the people of Ward 2 and the Argyle area, but also for the City of London. And I'm glad that what we're seeing in London is essentially no change. We've got an orange, a blue, and 2 reds. And we're going into a minority government, which means whatever the mix looks like tomorrow or in the next couple of days as things come together,
It should speak well for
we're going to
the
have
area.
local voices there to champion our issues.
Which is important,
Absolutely.
Agreed.
which is very important.
156.
Any
for the
thoughts
Liberals.
on Oxford? Any surprise there?
No, it's good representative.
Well, and
When
still
Dave
some...
decided to run again, I knew where that one would go.
He's been in what now? 16?
He came in
18 years?
04, I think.
Okay, okay.
He might have
15.
come in 06, but I think he came in 04 with me.
But exciting to see Matthew Chambers for the NDP, a very young candidate, sitting in second place and giving himself something to build
So
on
now,
for the future.
in a minority situation, he can spend some time staying active in the community and build up that name and go at it again. Or not, but those are the choices.
But the opportunity will be there, and Dave's not going to be the MP forever.
No.
So for Matthew, it's an opportunity to build for the future.
Right. I don't think there's any surprise there.
69 voter turnout was just around 69%,
Okay.
of which Karen took 49%.
Well, Elgin had 69% the last time, Elgin Middlesex London, and it does do that, but that's an incredibly positive win. I don't think I met anybody on the street who couldn't predict the winner.
Right.
No.
Right, and so it's sometimes it's, well, I think I'll just stay home then, right? And it's not the case. They take their voting pretty seriously there.
They do.
Right?
That's true.
And the Conservatives have moved ahead in popular vote now. Does that mean that we've won?
Yeah, but you're 30 seats short.
Oh, it's seats now. Oh, yes.
Now, see, if we had proportional
Lantern.
representation,
Yeah,
we'd
there
have
we
a
go.
couple more seats there, Joe.
Then I call for a Citizens Constitutional Committee here.
Any comments on Lambton, Kent, Middlesex?
That's maybe a little tighter than it would ever have been with Bev, and this is what happens when a long-term, well-liked politician. Leanne had a huge nomination race against 5 or 6 or 7, I think, and came out on top of that and campaigned well. But it's the other party's only chance is at the change of a popular politician like Bev, and the day's been carried here. It looks like it'll be pretty close to 50% of the vote. So. Peter's starting to stretch that London North Centre a little bit now.
Yeah. And strong showing by the NDP coming in second. It looks like right
He's
now.
an amazing candidate, too.
That's bigger than anybody, including the media, predicted.
Yes.
They said it was going to be so close.
It was a bellwether riding. It was close all week, and that sure isn't showing
close
that
to
there.
what, 46, 47%?
I think there was some thought that the NDP would carry more of it to it being a provincial NDP riding, and if that had happened, it might have taken.
Well, and Peggy Seiler's an incredibly strong
agreed.
MPP, right?
Right? And so I think that some of the predictions, some of the talking heads like us said, well, the NDP will do really well, and that will help the Conservative and make that riding tighter, but it sure hasn't.
We're at that point in the evening now where I need to ask you for your final thoughts and comments as we do our wrap-up. We have just about come to the end of our show, so I'll start, Joe Fontana.
Well, it's going to be, I think, a Liberal minority government. And I think the next year and a half or two, especially with some of the challenges that everybody spoke to, they're going to have to work together. And I hope after an election and all that's been said, that people understand that, people want parties to work together to get things done. And I think if there's a will there to do it, it'll happen. But again, it's a little bit better than I had predicted, and maybe some others, but it's 153 seats approximately. And I don't know if everything has been reported. I'm just a little disappointed that the Bloc is there with 35 and that the NDP has only got 25. Hopefully that'll move up a bit.
Yeah.
Well, and there's still some opportunity in BC, perhaps, for a couple of those ridings to flip. When it comes to the outcome, I think a minority government is going to be good for this country right now. I think there's going to be a real incentive for the parties to find a way to make this work. I think there's a couple parties who are going to actually do some soul searching after these results tonight. The NDP replaced Tom Mulcair after a seat loss in 2015. Yes. Does Jagmeet stay on, or do they look to replace him? The Greens. Elizabeth May had already given some indications that she was ready to hand over the leadership reins. So will we see a new Green leader? I think this minority parliament may have a chance of surviving 2 years, maybe even a little past 2 years. Will the parties figure things out? Even with the Conservatives, they were going to have to ask themselves, do they want Andrew Scheer to lead them into the next campaign?
I agree. I think he's got a big decision tomorrow.
Joe?
Well, I'll speak to that one first. They're 23 seats higher than they were when the writ was dropped. I guess anybody would take that as a victory, but it's a bit of a hollow one when you're coming second. I hope what happens here is that the current Prime Minister of our country does some good navel gazing and says, look, I wasn't all sunny days and didn't get to do it again. This is a good number for his party tonight compared to what some had been predicting over the last
10 short of a majority. Look at that. It's 10 short of a majority.
Well, it could easily, and depending on where we are, it could still happen. But to drop as many seats as has been from 177 to that, if we're going to say, gee, Andrew needs to look at himself and he's gained 20 seats, shouldn't Mr. Trudeau look at himself because he's lost 20 seats?
Sure.
I guess.
I was being jokeful.
Look, and I think the humble here, the humble part of minority government is going to click in tomorrow morning. I'd like to get home and check and see which of my friends or still have jobs and which don't. Many of the good ones and the good friends across a lot of parties we've seen on the screen tonight. So it's an exciting piece. I do worry that we'll be back at it. That this was a bit of a trial run, and we'll be back at it sooner than we want. And not so much of anything up there, but that Bloc number. As the other parties, whether they find they can offer enough to the Bloc to keep them in power and get things done in this country, but not look like we're adding to separatism. And when it gets to that, it may just be, well, then no. Well, bring us down.
It looks like the Liberals, and the NDP and Green, will be able to form collectively, and that shuts the BQ off out to a certain extent.
The Liberal Party owns a pipeline.
Yeah, we got to sell it.
And the other two parties have said no way. I want to see that being the first vote in Parliament.
Brana, final thoughts.
Yep.
I guess, I like the idea of a minority government for all of the, normal reasons. My concern is, and I think there's a couple of times it's been expressed tonight, that in a minority government, everybody who's just been elected in every party just starts campaigning tomorrow for what's coming up. There are people in the country right now that are hurting. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any kind of groundswell against the person that's yelling the loudest. So really take your job seriously, regardless of what's going to happen next year, in 2 years, and work for the people who need it. The candidates that I've talked to who are meeting people at the doors, the most important issue to these people are housing, are poverty, are people who need help with mental health care, with all of the basic human needs that we all deserve, So I'm just begging the people that actually do form this minority government to not turn tomorrow into day one of the next campaign and actually work for Canadians as opposed to your own self-interest. That's what I'm begging you guys to do, and I believe that you can do it. I'm an optimist.
Professor Anderson?
Sure. So, I mean, I think just looking at the overall vote totals, I think it's really interesting how close the Liberals and Conservatives are. In fact, the Conservatives seem to be polling a little bit ahead of the Liberals. I almost wish that the Conservatives perhaps were even less than what they are, or that there was a clearer role for a third party, the New Democrats or the Greens, to prop up a Liberal minority. My concern with the way we have it right now is that we'll be in a minority situation. The NDP will clearly support the Liberals on many issues, cross-party working to provide supply and policy movement on a range of issues. But with the Conservatives as strong as they are, both electorally in terms of their percentage and the seats that they have, that we may still have a lot of the polarization that we've been speaking about, and the desire to move away from some of that will continue, that the Conservatives will be the clear opposition with little incentive for either the Liberals or the Conservatives to sort of move across party lines. So it will be what it will be, and we will have a minority most likely, but with the way in which it's laid out, I think that there's still looks to be laid out. There will be grounds for a lot of polarized debate that will go forward, with the concern that we will, have another 18 months or 2 years of election campaigning for our next go round, and that's a little bit concerning. I think coming out of this.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for being here tonight and sharing your thoughts and ideas with us. It was really great to have you here, and if we do end up with a minority government, hopefully you'll be available then in 2 years from now to join us back here so we can do the same thing over again. Maybe put a pencil in on your calendar for 2 years out.
Yeah.
And thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure sharing all this information with you. If you wish to continue watching local results, please stay tuned here to Rogers Cable 13. And for the national results, go to City TV. My name is Dan Reith. It's been a pleasure hosting. Take care.
Couple cane poles sitting down by the creek, lines in the water, watching those bobbers, seeing that red sun sink. Mama's on the porch yelling supper's hot, y'all come and get it. We yelled 5 more minutes. At 16 it was 12:03, standing at her front door. Katie's dad said midnight, but we needed just a little more. Yellow light flipping on and off, interrupting that good night kissing. We wanted 5 more minutes. Time rolls by, the clock don't stop. I wish I had a few more drops of the good stuff, the good times. Oh, but they just keep on flying. Myself 5 more minutes. At 18, turned my helmet in, walked to the 50-yard line. Just the coach and me after we lost 8-10 to 9, and I cry to man next time to get in here. I'll have to buy a ticket. Can't you give me 5